Okay.
So thank you so much for making the time to talk to us on the podcast. You've helped me so much, and I've had a lifelong, I don't want to call it battle, but certainly conflictual relationship with fitness and food and my body. And it certainly changes at this stage of our life, in midlife over 40. But I've learned a lot from you specifically.
Oh,
And
that's good to know.
it's
That's
very,
good
I
to
mean,
know.
I feel like your message is so important on so many levels. So I wanted to connect our listeners with you, and especially women who are in their 30s, 40s, 50s, trying to navigate this, and even younger women who are
Yeah.
establishing what their patterns are going to be like when it comes to food and fitness and body. So thank you, Jennifer, for being here.
Thank
I
you, Nora.
and
I'm excited to be here. I'm honored that you invited me to be on. And it's nice to hear that it was helpful. I'm sure you appreciate this too, given I think anybody, regardless of what they do for a living, it's sometimes when you flip the perspective, you don't always realize what other people don't know. So like, for instance, what comes to you naturally, your level of knowledge with what you impart on your clients and patients, it's the same thing for me. So this stuff I've been doing it for so long that it's just like, it's part of
who you are.
who I am. And so I don't want to say it always comes easily to me, but let's say I know a fair amount about it. And it's easy for me to talk about. But I do appreciate that it is not easy for people to always implement. So they might start to think about it and really feel overwhelmed about the prospect of trying to make changes. They know something's not working, but they don't really know where to start. So I think it's really, just to always, for me, to keep that sort of beginner's mind
Yes.
top of mind when working with new people, and even with people I've been working with for years still.
I think that makes a difference in how you approach it. And we'll talk at the end about your social media, because I think that's really helpful. You have a lot of great information on there that can help people get steered in the right direction. But what I see, especially at my age, which I'm turning 46 in a few weeks, is that a lot of women find, and I saw your post about how metabolism doesn't change all that much.
I know. Well, I didn't make that up. That was actually a study. That's a
Right.
study that was just released in August 2021. So it's a new study.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
we can talk about that.
We should, because I've been saying, what used to work for me in my 20s doesn't work anymore. So I saw the study, but I was like, that's not necessarily been in my experience. And we're living in this, age of constant information, and everybody has the way to go about doing this. But what
Right.
I see a lot of women my age intermittent fasting. I see a lot of women just putting so much stress on their body to
Mm-hmm.
look a certain way, obviously like they did when we were younger, and kind of suffering from that, right? Or doing that and then going on weekends where they're binging to compensate for that depravity. So, I feel like there's a lot of misconceptions that we have around this topic that you bring a lot of clarity to. So what do you say, or from what you see, what are the common mistakes women are making, and men? Maybe the conversation is similar for
Yeah.
men, maybe it's different, when it comes to trying to stay fit, especially to lose weight, because I feel like at some point the majority of people are trying to lose weight at some point.
I think you're right there. Not as sad as it is to say, I mean, I can understand wanting to feel your best in your body, and if that happens to mean weight loss. But being fully transparent, all of the clients that I work for, when they first come to me, that always comes into the conversation as a goal. I don't think I've ever had anybody. That's not entirely true. I would say maybe 95% of people that come to me will come and say things, women, like, I want to tone up, or I want to get stronger, or I want my back not to hurt, but I also want to lose weight of varying degrees, anything from 5 pounds to more. And I think that there's a lot of different ways I can go with this question, but specifically, if you're talking about women in their 40s, I'm 51, and I can look back and my personal experience as a woman in my 40s, but also with my colleagues and friends and clients, certain things that I saw happening. When you feel like you want to be in shape, be fit, lose weight, you might start adopting, to your point, very extreme behaviors to do that. I know for myself, I look back, I wrote about this in a post the other day, that I definitely think I was over exercising for sure. I don't think I looked at it in that context at the time. And I don't think it ever became a problem, but I could see that I was using exercise as a means to control my body. Also control my stress level too, of a mom of 3 kids. And that was like my alone time, and also a desire to have a certain aesthetic.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it was my profession. It was what I did, but it also was something I really did enjoy. I did triathlons and I did marathons and I did century bike rides and I taught boot camps and all of the things. And it wasn't really until, I would say, probably around the time I turned 43, where I started to feel that was having diminishing returns on my body. And I began to just make a conscious choice to scale it back, with the idea that, let me just see what happens when I start coming back. So let me just see, like a curious mindset. And also I was having some pains, and I was actually, believe it or not, with as much cardio as I was doing, I was actually gaining weight, and not too huge.
Why does that happen?
I'll explain that in a minute, because it goes into what you were saying before. But at the time, listen, all of my conventional knowledge was coming from a fitness nutrition background that said, it's sort of like a calories in, calories out sort of thing, right? Because what most people understand to be true. If I eat more than I burn, I'll probably gain weight. And if I exercise it off, and then if that doesn't work, then maybe I'll try all of these other things like intermittent fasting or keto or whatever, insert whatever you want to try, whatever's in fashion for that day.
Right.
So I will definitely talk about why that the dynamic in which that happens. But that was just a little bit about my story. And your point was that women of this age group start to get into a situation where, there's the extremes. And I think that at some, this is certainly not to say that anybody has a diagnosed disorder around their body, but I think many, not most, but many women have a conflicted relationship with their bodies, just because I think we come out of the womb and into the world with our looks being important.
Oh, absolutely.
It's just our culture, and so you can't, I think that's something that's really hard to shake.
And deriving your value from the perception of other people regarding that aesthetic. So yeah, absolutely. But definitely extremes, cutting out whole food groups, fasting, and, just the different types of diets that people have adapted. But I do see more of an extreme.
Yeah. And I've noticed, on that, it's a really great point that you brought up, because I had this conversation with somebody yesterday, and like this one, I've known this woman for many years. She's a business owner, a mom, like a total go-getter, but she was like, why can't I, I don't understand why I can't ever get this together. And I still, I think I'm going to, she's like, yeah, I think I'm going to do intermittent fasting. And I'm like, okay, first of all, it's not that intermittent fasting doesn't have its benefits. It does, but that wouldn't be the first skill I would point, or the first strategy that I would point somebody toward, because really at the end of the day, why people are going to extremes is that they finally reach a point where they've just reached a limit with what they're comfortable with or what they want for their body. And they decide that they're ready, right? It's that the stages of change, right? Okay, I'm thinking about it. Now I'm ready to take action. And now, because I'm ready to take action, I want it to be as quick as possible. I want to just get this done. I want to go hard, and I want to see a result. And I totally get that. Like, it's not sexy. It's not gratifying to go slow, but at the end of the day, it is the thing that actually sustains, because in order to do it, it has to be a lifestyle change or a lifestyle shift. And most importantly, those changes are more likely to take hold and be changes and habits that you can adopt for the long term, so that you don't have to keep going to extremes. And I bring that back to like my story, like, okay, I had to teach myself to trust myself that less exercise was not going to mean I was suddenly going to gain 10 pounds. It meant, let me just see, because I can always go back to that. And what I found was a more conservative approach got me the result that I wanted.
And what happens, what do you see in the clients that you work with who go to the extremes, who adopt those extremes? What do
Couple
you
things.
see happen?
Yeah, a couple. If we're talking extremes, are we talking extremes of exercise? Or are we talking extremes of food behaviors, or both?
Maybe both. Because I do
Yeah.
feel like,
Okay.
especially in these towns we live in, and
Mhm.
many people haven't heard of orthorexia, but it's
Oh
kind of
yeah.
a common way of living.
Oh yeah.
And
I
when
know.
people adopt the extreme of overexercising or eliminating food groups or trying the
Yeah.
latest diet, whatever it is, it's almost integrated in our culture, certainly in Fairfield County.
Yeah.
So,
I think, yes, for sure. You hit the nail on the head. I think listen, I think people who are in a higher net worth, higher socioeconomic place in our country have the luxury to do that, right?
yeah,
Because you're not going to find that in poor communities. You're just not. I
right.
mean, I know it could go so many different directions with this. Listen, when it comes to the quality of your diet, that's important. That's certainly, we could talk about that later, but sticking with the whole, um, the extreme nature of things that we feel compelled to do. I think, also in a community like this, you have a lot of overachievers, right? So it's
Mm,
like everything has to be done. And we live in the same community, but I've lived in this community for 20 years, and I definitely saw it happening. I saw it really ramping up, um, with women around me in our late 30s and 40s. And I think it maybe is a combination between they're raising children, everybody wants their children
yep.
to sort of walk a path. Okay, so we're checking that box, and then we need to look a certain way and have our house look a certain way. Okay, that's the other box. And then we have to look a certain way in our physical body, not just the handbag and the jewelry and all that stuff, but like, so everything gets sort of amped up, and I think that does drive this sort of overachieving nature. And I've definitely seen it on all levels. So, but your question really was more like, how does this affect us? How does this affect our
Yeah.
body?
Mm-hmm.
I think what happens, I've noticed just in women in their 40s, especially with let me use running as an example, because that was a community I was really a part of, and had a lot of fun, a lot of amazing memories of running races with people and marathons and that kind of thing. But I think, and that was one of the activities that I think people saw great success in, but running can be really hard on your body. And as you age, you might start to suffer some injuries, and that really derails people. So I see the over exercising and the chronically being injured as something that started to show up more early 40s, mid 40s, late 40s for sure. And then I think it's very rare that you find somebody over 50 still running daily. Quite rare. Yeah. I mean, sure, there are outliers, but I know more reformed runners than I do know people that are still, especially with that level of training,
Yeah.
Um,
So in terms of the extremes, what do you see as the impact of that on the body?
yeah, well, injuries being one, I think,
What about
even,
dietary extremes?
yeah, dietary extremes, that was the next one. I mean, listen, if we're going to orthorexia, if anybody listening doesn't know what that is, it's just like an extreme focus on eating only clean, right? Is the best way, right? Everything has to be healthy. And I would be hard pressed to say that eating healthy is bad for you. But I also think that when you start being very neurotic about removing all of the food groups and being really hyper focused on every morsel you put in your mouth, it can be very paralyzing, right? Because you feeling like you're making yourself wrong for it, right? When you deviate off of what is your perception of what clean and healthy is. I think for the most part, I think it's good general advice to say to anybody, like, any person, try to make 80% of your diet whole foods. I think that's generally sane advice. What happens is, I think people, I've noticed it a lot actually with people who are and you could probably speak on more of the psychological impact of this, but like the more knowledgeable people are about diet nutrition, the more they tend to be prone to that, because they're seeking more and more information. And they sort of, it's that leveling up of how healthy can I possibly be. And I do think it's rooted in anxious tendencies of like the need to sort of control something, control your body, control what you put in your mouth. So the long-term implications can be really hard to eat outside your house when you don't have control. If you think about that, I mean, I've seen it happen in my friend group.
Okay. And I think too, just like you said, the psychological piece of it, when we completely try and suppress cravings and desires, they actually grow, they come back in full force. And I think that's what I've seen, at least working with people like this, and even in myself, when I go on those kind of extremes that are not sustainable, it's never something that ends up having that much of a benefit, because in time it will come back. And part of too what I want to talk about is the stress we're causing on our body in those places, right? So because you said to me it's not sustainable, and then people tend to gain that weight back. What is happening there?
Yeah, well, and to your point, let me just dovetail off of that too. I think you're so right, and that's why it's so important. When I was talking before about developing, not going for the extremes and working on smaller habits daily is really the road to more long-term success. Because when you do that, you don't create those extremes, right? Because you're going very slowly.
Right.
You're going very slowly, and you're adopting new habits, and you're creating evidence for yourself that you can in fact make newer, healthier choices, without saying, okay, here it is Monday morning, now I'm going to do this like extreme thing. I mean, to be fair, elimination diets and taking food groups out have their time and place, but I would not that for people that's not something I would recommend as a first level strategy ever.
What do you recommend in terms of being in that 30, 40, 50 range, trying to stay healthy?
Yep.
And also I feel like honoring your own intuition.
Yes.
And
I think
is
that's
important
really tough for a lot of
trust.
women. Yeah.
What do women need?
If I were to pick three, Neuro, I would say the first thing I see in my client base is they're oftentimes not eating enough on a regular basis. So they'll do what you're saying, the like, I'll be good Monday to Friday, but then Friday, Saturday, Sunday hits, and they're like, oh my gosh, like I've been so good all week. And there's sort of the reward. And she said before, like, I wouldn't necessarily say binging, but just maybe eating in a way that's like, oh my gosh, because I'll wait till Monday to start watching what I'm eating again. And so I personally take a different approach. My preference. So number two, I would say make sure that you're eating enough protein at every meal as a female. And I know a lot of my female clients have a really hard time wrapping their brain around this one. And to be fair, I once upon a time probably did too. Like, oh gosh, that seems like so much food, or that seems like so much protein. Now, I want to be respectful of the debate between plant-based versus animal-based protein. As a different conversation, but in general, for women in their 40s and beyond, really need to be getting more protein than they're getting. The reason for that is really multiple reasons, but one of them is protein is how you build muscle.
Yeah.
So, but after you turn the age of 30, you start losing muscle percentage points every year if you are not doing anything to actively preserve what you have or to gain more. And the way that you gain more or to preserve what you have is to eat protein, but also strength training. So this is why over 40 is so key for women to be doing this. So the endless cardio really is so when I use myself as an example, I was strength training, but I was really depleting my body with all of the cardio that I was doing. The best way I can describe it is if you think about like kindling on a fire, starting a fire in your fireplace, and the kindling is your cardio, but the logs are muscle. Muscle is money in the bank for the long term that earns interest. Cardio is it's like your credit card. Right. So it's not bad. It's just not, it wouldn't be a first level strategy. So I think for a lot of women
And
who
that's what
maybe,
people think. I should do more
yeah, oh, for
cardio
sure.
to lose weight, but it does create stress and inflammation on your body at a certain level,
100%.
right? And
Yeah.
increasing your cortisol hormone, which keeps weight on and increases cravings. So, I mean, that's stress
Yep.
in general. Any stress does that. So,
Yeah. And,
you say,
it's hard
what's the
when we're speaking.
ratio?
Yeah. And when we're speaking in generalities too, about like what women in their 40s can do, right? It's hard for me to say because everyone is kind of different. Some women are oftentimes when I work with a client, I don't like to start with like, hey, do this, do that. I'm like, I want to know what you're coming to the plate with and what your behaviors have been. No judgment. Like, please, I like people to keep a food journal because I really want to know. I don't even want to know just what they're eating, but I want to know how they're eating it. So like, if you're eating in a chaotic way and moms do this a lot, busy moms, right? Everybody else's needs are coming first, but you sitting down and eating a meal is probably not happening all that often, right? Because you're cooking and feeding kids and then cleaning up and then like grabbing bites of food. So as a result, when we do anything in a distracted way, and you know this, we're just not present for the experience. So
Right.
why is our mealtime any different? And it's not like every single meal that you eat has to be this, restaurant quality or Instagram shot, but you want to be present for it so that you can actually enjoy
it.
and savor the food that you've eaten, even if it's something that you eat all the time. Like,
Right.
be satisfied with that. So when you were talking about like stress, the stressful thoughts too, I 100% believe that. I think the more hyper focused is different than being mindful and present, by the way.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yep.
But hyper focused and really, trying to, I'm using the air quotes, be good around what you eat. It just can create more stress, psychological stress that it has to compound what the physical stress of under eating, over exercising would also be.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think the psychology, just in terms of how you approach these issues, body image. I mean, if we are feeling negative about ourselves, we're adding more resistance to the process instead of speaking to ourselves self compassionately, as we would a friend going through a similar
Yeah.
situation who is unhappy with how they looked in that moment. We don't talk to ourselves like that.
What's interesting too, I think this is just like a little bit of a side note, but being in the field that I'm in and the age that I am, I've I've um I've made a lot of friends in the industry who do similar things to me. So either they're nutrition coaches or registered dietitians or personal trainers. It's interesting to me because I reflect and I think like maybe in our 20s and 30s and even 40s, and maybe lack of experience with actually really working with people in the trenches for a long amount of time. It's like you can give a client or a person all of the information. So all of the information that you and I are talking about, I could say, well, you need to eat enough protein and make sure you're doing your strength training, whatever. But the implementation is the hard part, right? The habit change is the hard part. And I have found that sometimes coaches, and even I was this way too, probably like in my early 30s when I was doing nutrition plans for people, it was very black and white, the delivery, like, here's the information, just do it. What you realize when you work with people, it's like, it's not lack of information, because sometimes we need to hear things 50 times
Yeah,
before they
many times.
finally
Yep.
literally like become something we truly understand in our bones. Sometimes it
Mhm.
takes that long. And
Mhm.
then how to implement it. Like, so going back to like I was saying the food journaling thing, or just being observant of your eating and being mindful, like that might take you some practice.
Yep.
And let's zoom out further. If you're a busy mom and you have a hard time sitting down to a meal, what things can you do aside from the food to maybe make that more possible for you?
Mhm. Mhm.
So I'm big on a morning practice. Now that practice can include lots of different things. That practice might just entail looking at your planner and figuring out
Mhm.
when you're going to sit down for 15 minutes and take a mindfulness break, or put your feet up and not be super stressed, or actually
Right.
sit down and eat a meal. All of those things, they matter. They matter in your ability to be able to change your habits in a way. And I think this is the real key takeaway, that's not stressful,
Right. Right.
right?
And
It's like,
yeah. hmm I
because
think
if you
when,
don't make time for it, you feel guilty of the fact that you didn't make time for it. And that starts to
yeah,
gnaw
for
at you.
sure. Yeah. And I think that was some of the things and I mean, when I came to you, it was post COVID. We were just coming out of things. I didn't fit into literally any of my pants, none, which now I do. I still have more clothes that I don't fit into. We're leaving for a wedding this weekend in Arizona, and I knew which dress I wanted to wear. I'd worn it before. And I put it on. I was like, okay, Ed, you have to zip this up. And he's like, this is a no-go. Like, this is not
We have to
happening.
pick a different dress.
I know. I was like, all right, well, I accept that. And that's
Yeah.
at some point I'd like to fit into that dress. But um, some of the things that you told me that were really helpful was don't create more stress to get healthy. And that meant, for me, I work late at night. Last night, I
Mhm.
couldn't sleep. I was up at 1:30. So I was like, I'm going to get up and write an article for Psychology Today. I went to bed at 3:30.
Yeah.
I don't get sleep. And that was something you had said. If you haven't slept that night, then don't do a hard workout the next
Yeah.
day. Don't
Yep.
punish yourself, recover. So
Yep.
those things really made a difference in being able to sustain the process. You told me more protein, you told me to strength train more than cardio, at least for me. And
Yep.
all of those things, but especially being mindful of my stress and keeping it low, um, in terms of the habits that I were adopting, made all the difference and me
Yeah.
fitting in my pants again. So
Let me ask you this. Let me turn it back to you. Did that feel difficult for you to implement?
no, no, because I think what adds to resistance and creating new habits is adapting things that don't feel good. They're
Right.
stressful. And
Mhm.
then we put pressure on ourselves to sustain these things that don't make us feel good. I mean, we might like how we look at the end of it,
Yeah.
but that is a transient feeling if we can't sustain the habit, right? So, and it makes just sense on the cortisol level. If we're doing
Right.
things that are creating more stress, it's going to work counterproductively to actually us feeling healthy and fit and even losing weight,
Right.
in that sense.
And I know that that goes beyond, I know that that goes, it flies in the face of conventional wisdom of everything we've ever been taught. But I do think it would be interesting to hear this from you too. Like, I feel like in the past maybe 3 or 4 years now, if you do any sort of Google search on wellness for women over 40, the hormonal picture is coming into play, right? So that's the
Mm-hmm.
buzzword. That's a health buzzword.
Right.
Hor- Hormones matter. They do.
Mm-hmm.
Cortisol
Mm-hmm.
is a hormone. Insulin is a hormone. All of these things, if you think about your hormones, and this is like, we certainly don't have enough time to talk about all of that. And I'm not the expert about hormonal health other than to say, staying in my lane with what I do. But what we know is that when your cortisol is always on,
Elevated.
you
Mm-hmm.
run, yeah, you run the risk of burning out. Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's the
Yeah.
whole renal fatigue, which isn't it's not a diagnosis, but it's basically, if you think about, it's the check engine light, right? At
Right.
some point, if you don't recharge that check engine and you don't take care of your engine, that check engine light's gonna come on. And a lot of women who have a lot on their plate, a lot of things to do, a lot of things they want to do, so trying to reach a certain level of productivity, all of those things, that's like, it's no wonder, right? It's the perfect storm. And then you add high intensity exercise onto that. To be fair, let's say you don't do high intensity exercise at all, and then you start doing it, you will probably see a result pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
But it probably won't be a sustainable one, because at the end of the day, your body wants you to survive. So it's going to do what it needs to do to keep you alive. This is, cortisol also, if we're going to stay on that subject, we take our calories too low. We don't eat enough. We don't eat enough protein. Our bodies are gonna secrete cortisol to keep us energetic to do the things. And we really should be getting we should be getting it from food and nutrients,
Mm-hmm.
from cortisol. But
Right. What's interesting about that, and I wrote about this in my book, is when our cortisol levels are high, it shuts down the mechanism that produces cortisol called the HPA axis, the
Mhm.
hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis,
Yep.
which is so important in regulating immune function. So for people who are chronically stressed,
Yeah.
there's always this tendency, like you said, for your body to regulate that which is too elevated, but we do that at the expense of our immune function. So
Right.
long term, that has pretty serious implications in developing some pretty serious diseases, even
Yeah.
related to
Beyond the size
cancer.
of your beyond the size of your pants. And I do think, the good news is I do see that perspective is shifting
Hmm.
around that.
Yep.
So that at the end of the day, when I try to explain to women, like really when you're talking about your metabolism, it's a barometer and it's always adjusting
Hmm.
according to what is going on in your body, right?
Mm,
So one
hmm.
thing's high, another thing's going to go low. And it's doing that because it's trying to keep you or as regulated as possible based on the circumstances. So
Absolutely.
what's going on here, but I have two pets at my
I
feet
know
that
your
have
dogs are so cute.
to
Uh,
visit me.
Couple more questions for you because one of the things that my sister and I talk about, my sister is turning 40, my youngest sister in October, um, is that it almost feels like it doesn't matter the exercise we do if we're not eating well. And it feels like nutrition is more the game changer than the actual exercise. I mean, is there truth in that? Is
Yeah, I do think we need to really appreciate, and this goes back to before, I want to be very careful when we were talking about the orthorexia question, but eating healthy. But the reality
Yep.
is that as you age, well, really through the lifespan, but as you age, proper nutrition really matters. Like getting
Mm,
good nutrients matters. Now, does that mean you can't ever have things that are yummy and tasty? And no, it doesn't. But you
mhm,
want really the primary, cornerstone of your diet to be that, right?
mm,
Really.
mhm.
So to your point, when it comes to that, the quality of the nutrition matters as you age. Also, you don't, if you have, this is, we see in women over 40, perimenopausal women, when estrogen drops, it affects our gut
Mm,
function and the
mhm.
health of our gut. Okay. And so when your gut isn't functioning properly, you're not absorbing nutrients as well. So your body can't make use of those nutrients
Right, right.
well as it could in a healthier gut. And so this is why then we go down the rabbit hole. And like I say, it's a higher level skill, I think, for people. It's not necessarily where I start people like, let's work on your gut health, but it is important. And the research on it is really pretty incredible with how important it is, everything down to serotonin
Mhm.
levels, right? Because
Yep,
your
yep.
serotonin is something that up to 90% of your serotonin is made in your gut. So if your logic would say, okay, well, I want good food in my gut so that my body can make those neurotransmitters, and so that I can have actually a fighting chance of having a better mood. But
That's
that,
right.
but that would hold true for teens and kids too, right? So
That's right. That's
by,
right.
processed foods or diets that are too high in sugar and that kind of thing can really, really wreak havoc on somebody having good gut health. That's
And
our
we
gut.
are so
Go ahead.
we're just so integrated in that way because like you said, that affects serotonin, which affects mood, and mood then affects motivation and our thoughts and the quality of our thoughts, which then,
Mhm.
determine how well do we find kind of the persistence to stay in a process, right? So it is all so connected in terms of
I
our
know.
mental, emotional, physical health.
And it's funny too, because people, when people ask me general questions like that, right? It's like, yes, and there's so many other points that can come off
Right.
of that one, because even what we're saying, when we're talking about gut health in general, we're talking about stress levels, how that affects your gut, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
not it's an
No,
adverse,
right.
it's an adverse situation, and things aren't going to work as well. We see a lot of
Absolutely.
women too in their 40s. It's worth noting here that starting to have digestive and gut issues in their 40s. And part of the reason for that is it's a higher stress time of life, right? You
Mm-hmm.
generally have more responsibilities. Um, But, and also, like I said, the hormonal factor of declining estrogen levels can affect that, affects the gut lining. So it makes you more susceptible to some to gut issues.
Right.
That, it's not, put it this way, simply put, if you're having feelings of bloating and discomfort in your stomach after you eat, that's definitely worth paying attention to, and not just chalking it up to, oh, I need to intermittent fast. I mean, that can help, but it's not necessarily the cure. There's a lot more things that need to be paid, we need to pay attention to that. And it's worth noting just because I see it a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. No, this has all been super helpful. And I think just help to give people a perspective on how to go about this because it's such a complicated issue. And like you said, women have struggled with it since
Mhm.
they're little. I mean, it makes me so sad sometimes to think how young I hear girls start talking about their body and saying that they're chubby or fat or whatever it is, and hearing those cues from their peers too, taking those cues from their peers. So, but tell us how we can connect with you. How can listeners connect with you? Because you have so much great information, and you're starting a program, starting another program up soon. So
I
tell
know.
us, how do we
Lots
connect
of
with you?
programs. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
the best way to find me is on Instagram at Jennifer
Okay.
Kirsch Fitness. I'm on there just about every day. Um,
I'll post a link to that in the show
Thank you.
notes.
And I have actually several programs right now, but the one that's coming up really soon, actually March 14th, I'm starting. It's called Straight Up Strength.
Hmm.
And essentially it's an 8-week strength training program for women over 40.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, and it's a program. It's a video based program, but I've included. I ran the program last year, and it was just video based. But this year, what I decided to do was to add a component of small group training online, so
Hmm.
to give women a little bit more support, a little bit more accountability, so that they could get better results from their program. Sometimes, as
Right.
you know, we can watch. I think this happens a lot with apps. You sign up for the app, you're super excited, but then 2 weeks in, you're like, I don't want to do it. So I think
That's
when you
right.
have somebody, yeah, this is really, there's something to the accountability factor of checking in with somebody every week and being able to troubleshoot and celebrate the wins and all that good stuff. So
No,
that
that's
will start
great.
on March 14th. But yeah, just head on over to my page and
That's great. So I will direct people there. And
hey,
thank you so much for taking
you're
this
welcome.
time and
You're
having this
welcome.
conversation. And I am sure people are going to walk away with things that they didn't know before. And also just to be kinder to themselves when it comes to monitoring their stress, because that affects this process more than I think people realize.
Yeah, I would say that's probably the best piece of advice. I think that's a good place to start, regardless of what your goals are,
Hmm.
right? Whether your
Hmm.
goal is weight loss, get stronger, just feel better in your body, sleep better. It's a lot of different health goals that continue on a spectrum. But I think managing your stress and being kinder to yourself is a really great place to start.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
sometimes harder to do, right? Sometimes
Yeah.
harder to do that.
For sure. But this is definitely motivation to start that process, or at least maybe make some changes to it so that we can live healthier and not create more stress in the process of getting healthy.